Hey everyone, Connor English here, hopping on today to chat about some best practices for the perennial salinity cover and a little bit of chatter about salinity regions on farms across Western Canada. I did some research diving into a wheat and canola rotations on a 10-year cycle across Western Canada. These numbers were pulled off of Manitoba Ag's cost of production. So we just took three main costs that every farm deals with on an annual basis: seed, chemical, and fertilizer. We applied those to what they would look like per acre on an average between wheat and canola. Come out to about $2,358 per acre over 10 years on every acre of land, just solely on these three costs. Now, introducing that into a saline area where a net return is basically nothing, more years than not, we are looking at a deficit of very close to, if not right at, $2,358 an acre across 10 years. So really trying to put that into perspective, looking at the dollar values that we are sinking into some of these troubled areas on the farm that are high salt levels, don't grow crops, usually prone to high water tables. We're looking at a net loss year after year in these areas. So to really put this into perspective, a 2,500 acre farm with a wheat and canola rotation, if you say 5% of your total acres could be affected by salinity, which is probably pretty average across Western Canada, for sure in parts of southern Manitoba where we have high water tables. We can see salinity regions probably push closer to 10% of your total acres that you're dealing with. So if we looked at those values of just shy of $2,400 an acre over a 10-year period at 5% of that 2,500 acre farm, that's just shy of $300,000 in 10 years that we're going to be applying through seed, chemical, and fertilizer to these areas and getting absolutely nothing out of them. We're losing money year after year on these areas, which in turn are really, really affecting our farm profitability and one of the reasons why farms continue to keep shrinking. We're sinking money into these regions just shy of $300,000 on those three factors, not to mention the man hours dealing with spraying and tillage in these zones, trying to get them productive. We just continue to work in these areas and not get anything out of them. And there needs to be a change moving forward to stop sinking money into these regions and put species in these zones that are going to thrive in the environment. Two main takeaways from looking at this right away is, even if you continue to seed through these areas, turning off the fertilizer when driving through these areas and quit spraying these regions of the field year after year with the same chemical applications. Obviously, if it hasn't worked in the last 15, 20 years, there's a pretty high chance we're not going to see it working in the next 20 years if we continue to do the same thing year after year. Yes, there's some dirt work that can be done maybe to improve a small percentage of some of these zones, but in all reality, we're just moving that issue on further down the field or onto the next field where there's going to be problems down the road. So I would say two of the main things that most producers can look at, even if they're not wanting to sow down a perennial crop into these regions, is just shutting off for fertility when going through these regions at seeding time and really breaking the chemical application that's happening in them year after year. There's maybe potential to utilize some chemical applications for cleanliness of the field, but the year after year events that are happening, it's obviously not working. So another option we looked at by utilizing the salinity cover and utilizing a barley crop in establishment year, we looked at some of the seed costs, obviously quite significantly reduced over a 10-year period as you're only seeding this crop once. Our chemical application is very reduced, looking at doing a fall burn-off the year prior to seeding, as well as a pre-seeding burn-off to clean any weed pressure off that might be growing first in the spring. And then obviously shutting that fertilizer bill right off as we have high salt tables in these environments, and adding more salt to the environment that it's in is not going to help the cause at all. It's more or less going to affect it more than anything, make the situation worse. So you look at a total cost per acre over 10 years at $100, it is very, very small compared to seed, chemical, and fertilizer costs on a wheat and canola rotation. So to put this into perspective, on a 2,500 acre farm, same as we looked at on the wheat and canola side of things, 125 of these acres, if they're in a saline state, we're looking at an investment of $12,500 over 10 years. That's going to be spent on seed, chemical, and fertilizer. Massive difference from $12,500 to $300,000, and just their ability to stop putting some of these inputs into these regions with nothing growing. So the salinity cover is developed with some species in the mix, lots of wheatgrasses that have had lots of success in salinity areas across Western Canada, high percentage of tall fescue in the mix, as well as utilizing some legumes such as sweet clover, which we have had a ton of success with at my home farm, as well as a salt-tolerant alfalfa that just thrives in some of these environments a little bit more. So having diversity in the mix is really crucial. Obviously, everyone's soils are going to be so different, and everyone's salinity areas are going to be so different. Having a multitude of different species in the mix with hopes that one or two does catch really well and able to thrive in that environment. So these salinity areas, traditionally on lots of farms, foxtail and kochia grow really well in them. Salty white patches across the farm. And like I talked about before, the net loss areas in these farms and the areas that really affect our overall profitability across Western Canada. So a little bit about first year establishment for establishing the salinity cover. Like to look in years in advance, thinking about, hey, maybe I want to seed this zone down to perennials in the salinity zone. It's not working on the annual side of things. Having those thoughts a year or two in advance so you can set your system up for success. Probably going in for a post-harvest burn-off the year prior, the fall prior to seeding them down, will be very beneficial just to take care of any biannual weeds that could be growing in that region, or just suppress them more or less than anything, as well as a pre-seeding burn-off as well, because once the perennials are put into the ground, you do not have any herbicide options, and you're restricted more or less to cutting if you have major weed issues. On the moisture side of things, obviously these zones are quite wet in more cases than not in the springtime. So getting in there when you can and doing a good job of getting good seed to soil contact with the drill when you're going in. We highly suggest in these regions seeding obviously the perennials with a companion crop of barley just to slow down the amount of weed pressure that could be in these zones. But getting in there at a one-pass setting, usually you have one chance to get in there in the spring. When it dries up and before we get our summer rains, just utilizing it when you can. If the environment isn't correct, don't rush it. Don't go in there and make a mess of it, as it is an investment that we're making in year one, and we want it to last for a long time. In harvest options for year one, there's some opportunity to utilize barley in establishing some of our perennials as well. This just gives a really good opportunity for weed pressure competition in year one. Barley's been used quite heavily across Western Canada in the salinity areas. It does work well out of the annual crops. Obviously pulling the fertility out of it and just allowing it to do its thing in that zone. So definitely some options to utilize that companion crop in year one. If there's a high percentage of weed pressures going on in that region, which more cases than not there probably is going to be, possibly looking to mow that area or hay it just to reduce the amount of weed pressure and really reduce the seed bank of weeds that is there. Our whole main goal in that first year is to get the perennials to establish a root system. So we're really not looking to reap the benefit of a massive forage crop in that first year. Yes, if you do get barley to grow, that's great, and you can utilize it in a green feed setting. We have in the past. But if it's more or less just reduced amounts of barley that's growing and you do have some weed pressure, probably going out there to take care of it mechanically is a good idea, just to reduce the amount of up and coming weeds the next year as much as possible and give those perennials a chance to establish into the fall time. In year two and beyond, I definitely like in a scenario to put the plants in a position to succeed, allowing them to mature so they can seed themselves out. Like I said earlier, we're trying to put a multitude of different species in these zones because we don't know which species is going to do the best in that environment. There's probably going to be a few that really take off and a few that don't. So the ones that do take off, we want them to seed themselves out again, really establish their presence in the stand. And if they seed themselves out, there's a good chance that those seeds are going to germinate in years to come and really thicken the stand. So there is some opportunity for utilizing these zones in the field for haying or grazing if that's something that works in your farm's context. We've utilized grazing in these zones quite a bit on our farm. Been a really good return, just stopping the inputs that we're having to put in and utilizing a high quality product for our cattle throughout the summer months. So there is opportunities for utilizing it and selling a product off of these zones in the future. But just having something established there and not putting any more money into that area is probably the most important thing moving forward to improve our farm profitability. So to learn more, please feel free to check out the salinity cover page on our website. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to any of the territory managers, as we'd be really happy to talk with you about how to improve some of our saline troubled areas on the farm and really in the end improve our farm's bottom line and improve profitability moving forward.